we're gonna get started here now with this February 24th gathering. We're very excited today to have with us Taylor Marshall and Ed Pinero. Taylor is with both EcoMetrics and Restore the Earth Foundation. Ed is the president of EcoMetrics, and we're going to hear from them in just a moment. This is our team. These are the folks that bring these presentations and discussions to you each month. This slide is to explain that we don't have all of the answers, nor do we support any particular strategy. This is a place where we can have discussions and learn a little bit from each other. Our partners are listed here for your viewing pleasure. And as well, we have to say thank you to our funders, because without them, we would not be able to bring this program to you. I'd like to pass this on to Maida to talk a little bit about the Passing It On workshops that she produces.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of interest in Passing It On workshops this year. I think the word is spreading, and I'm getting some nice requests, people still considering it. If you do know a tradition bearer who might want to pass on their tradition, though, do contact me and let's see if we can work something out. As an example, one of the ones that we did last year, Richard Landry was joined by Connie Duhon-Swear at the Maurice Museum. This was one of 4 sponsored by the Acadian Museum and ERAF. They did storytelling, but it was all in French.
So this is the agenda for today. We're going to hear from Taylor and Ed. Then we're going to have a brief question and answer session with them. We're going to ask what their hope for the coast is. We'll talk a little bit about our position statement, the working groups, see if any of you have any announcements to share with us. And then, of course, we end with an informal discussion from 1 to 1:30. So with no further ado, I would like to pass the mic over to Taylor.
Thanks, Jonathan. Now let me see if I can do this without any technical difficulties.
If it goes like my day, there's no guarantees.
All right, let's see. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, you obviously did not give up your technological abilities for Lent. Doing great.
Let me see if I can get it in the full screen view. Hold on one second. Okay, there we go. We're good? Okay.
We're good.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having Ed and I today. And it's great to see in the chat who's here and what you all are focused on. And it's right up our alley. So we're happy to share some of the work we're doing and eager to participate in a Q&A with you all. But I'm going to be talking today about how some of the work that we do helps to value the cultural and heritage assets along the coast as part of reforestation work that we're working on. And as Jonathan mentioned, I'm wearing 2 hats today, and I'm going to be wearing both of them in this presentation. One is with Restore the Earth Foundation, which is a nonprofit that has been doing coastal restoration in Louisiana since 2008. And I'm going to be tying that work with our restoration efforts to EcoMetrics, our second hat, which is my second hat, which is a methodology that we created at Restore the Earth to better communicate and assess the value creation that was being generated as a result of restoring landscapes. We knew that when we were restoring landscapes, especially historic cypress landscapes in Louisiana, for example, that not only was it creating value for the environment, the habitats, the local economy, but also the local communities and obviously in these cases, the culture, because it was returning cypress forests, which, ancestors on the coast had been living off the land for hundreds of years before it started disappearing. And so we developed EcoMetrics to basically be a way to communicate all that value creation. And now it's its own company, and we'll get into a little more about what we do. But for the purposes of today, we'll be talking about how we translate this reforestation into cultural and social value that we can communicate to fund these projects, but also demonstrate why it's important to protect these, communities and ways of life. So the project I will touch on today is at Pointe-aux-CHENES Wildlife Management Area. It's owned and managed by Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this WMA and Terrebonne Parish, and we have a friend here, Mark Black, who we've been working with on this project. It is a 4,000-acre bald cypress reforestation. It is on hold for the next year or two still after Ida. We're just waiting for the salinity to balance back out. But the good news is the acres we have planted there survived the storm, great survivability considering what the area went through. And they're still performing great. So we will be back to finish the project. We're just kind of waiting till nature does its thing. So this acreage is pretty significant because not only is it large, 4,000 acres, but it's geographically positioned in a place that can truly help protect Houma and all the inlying communities. So we have been working since 2016 to put this reforestation on the ground, and we'll continue to until it's complete. We are, as I mentioned, planting bald cypress trees. I won't get into the details, but we do ensure that all of our seeds are native and locally collected so that they're resilient to the landscape we're planting them in. We've seen really great success. They're very happy here, as you can see. These trees were planted in early 2017. And so you can see just in those years how much they've taken off. And Jonathan's actually been out there, so is Mart, to see, how happy they are. And I'm looking forward to getting back out there very soon. And then we're also seeing, as a result of these trees taking off, habitat creation and seed production on the trees, which is great because it's naturally regenerating. So we think these trends will only continue. And as that continues, the outcomes we anticipate from this project is that it will not only reestablish this historic cypress forest, but all the benefits that come with it in terms of flood and storm protection, carbon sequestration, water quality improvement, but also enhanced recreational activities, job opportunities, and returning certain factors of life to the area. And of course, that what comes with that is portions of the livelihood, identity, and culture of the area, where everyone used to subside on the cypress habitats. And so we're eager to be able to tell that story as the forest grows and demonstrate that value from the cultural and social side. And so kind of tying those efforts that I just explained to how do we translate that into demonstrating that value. As I mentioned, we developed a methodology called EcoMetrics, and Ed is going to get a little more in the weeds than I will, but just to start us off, it's a methodology that we use that basically engages, it does a number of things, but as it relates to the cultural and social value, we engage directly with stakeholders on the ground before, during the project to really understand why the landscape is important, what could be gained by restoring the landscape, and what could be lost if it's not restored. And through a series of very specific questions and our internal processes, engaging with the community and understanding those values helps us to generate basically a value map to understand that value. And then through a complicated process, which Ed will touch on, we put financial proxies on that to actually communicate that value in monetary terms. So we're basically putting a cultural value on the cypress forest. And here's just some of the steps that I mentioned. We take, we make an effort to go down, we host workshops in the community, we interview local people, and we try to get a great spread of different stakeholder groups. So, we're getting good representation from Native tribes to local government to the taxidermist who might have more work because there's more hunting on the WMA. But really asking questions and understanding how they value the land, what would be protected as a result of that, and what could be gained or lost as, with or without the project, kind of helps us to figure out what outcomes are important and then how to value that. So, one thing Ed will touch on, we can dig into a little more, is that helps us put a value on like the Chauvin Sculpture Garden or the local snowball stand, or, the value of protecting this land so that the Piggly Wiggly can continue to stay open. In learning from the community about those places and why they're important to preserve, it helps us kind of tell that story, but also generate that value. We're going to get into some wonkier slides here, but this is kind of the project or the process we go through. I'm going to turn it over to Ed to dig in a little bit more on this, but this is kind of how we translate trees in the ground to what it is creating for the local community, the local economy, and the local culture and heritage. So Ed, do you want to step in and talk to these slides?
Sure, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit more. So kind of building on what Taylor talks about, when you look at projects like this, especially projects that have a nature-based component to it, we kind of intuitively know that there's many benefits that are associated with those projects. So what we're trying to do with EcoMetrics is identify, quantify, and then where possible, put a value on those benefits. And when we do that, we look at all types of benefits: environmental, social, economic, cultural, then there's socioeconomic benefits. So there are many different categories. And as you can imagine, being able to figure those out and quantify those benefits varies from benefit to benefit. Whereas it's relatively easier to figure out how biodiversity increases, it's much more difficult to figure out what is the cultural value and benefit that comes along with these, particularly when you're trying to quantify and value them. So the process that we use is kind of a mix of information collection, looking at available databases, looking at available research work that has been done, collecting information on the site. But equally important to that is really engaging with the stakeholders to understand how they perceive the project, what they expect to be the changes and impacts, how those changes and impacts they feel are going to affect them. Is it good? Is it bad? And also to get a sense of the priority. What's more important? Is this benefit going to be more important than others? And we roll all that information together to figure out, okay, if this is an expected benefit, then based on how people perceive it as a benefit, how can we calculate what that is? And how can we put a value on it? And then we put all that information together to be able to show what this valuation looks like. And I think the best way to show this is to show you the next slide, Taylor, please. Is it gives you an example of how this is kind of sorted and put together. This is just a subset of real information that came out of this Pointe-aux-Chenes project. And you see what you take away from this is, first of all, how we define who the stakeholders are. And there's many, many different kinds of stakeholders. This is just 3 categories out of, I don't know, there's 15 or so that go with this project. And these stakeholders each have a perception of what the benefit will be for them. And some of these benefits cross back and forth. And by understanding who the stakeholders are, what the benefits they perceive, we can then start figuring out what these are worth. And then with that in mind, you immediately start to see that you can sort them even further. Some of these benefits are kind of related to local economic development. They're more economically oriented. So the reason these are grouped this way is because if you improve hunting, fishing, recreation habitat, that means more people are coming, they're spending money in the community, they're going to restaurants, they're staying in hotels, they're buying licenses and permits. So there's a clear economic development aspect to this. But then there's also this more indirect quality of life benefit from these kind of projects. With this restoration work, we're seeing improvements in air quality. More trees mean better air quality. This kind of vegetation, this kind of restoration improves surface water quality. And obviously, most important in this area is just the storm protection and the storm surge protection. So the quality of life improves in the community, and this can be valued. It can be valued in sense of how people want to be in the area, property values, and so on that increase because it's a better quality of life. And then I think the one that really gets at what we're talking about today with this, the concept of cultural value, is this sense of place, this cultural value. This is probably the most difficult set of outcomes to be able to quantify, but it really gets at what we're talking about. You know, the fact that connection to a place and connection to the culture of a place really has value, and it varies. You know, it could be physical health, mental health, amenity value, this feeling that you really want to be somewhere, and that can also all be valued. Just to give you a quick example from Pointe-aux-CHENES, one of the things that we learned from the indigenous community is that these bold cypress trees were very important historically and culturally in that community, not only because of the traditions that it meant for these communities, but there was also an economic aspect to it. These were used to make baskets, which beautiful baskets that were part of the culture, that culture. So the return of the bold cypress trees has both that reconnection with their historical perspective as well as an economic development aspect for the community. So anyway, in general, this is how we do this work, and we end up with a very long list of outcomes, and we work through them all. Can you go to the next slide, the last slide here? So just to kind of wrap up, the other way to show the same information is to kind of give a visual of how is this collective benefit distributed among all the different stakeholders that we identify, because it gives you a sense of the importance of the project and the impact of the project. And for Pointe-aux-CHENES, you see that the biggest beneficiaries, so to speak, are the communities. And that's because the communities are affected by all aspects of it, the environmental benefits, the local economic development benefits, as well as the social and cultural benefits. Because there's so many benefits in a project like this that affect the community, they see the lion's share of the benefit. In the interest of the time we had allotted, that's all I had. So you go to the next slide, Taylor, and take control again.
So yeah, that's the down and dirty. Usually this is an hour presentation, but for today we had 15 minutes, but happy to answer any questions. I guess you can raise your hand virtually, and I don't know, Sarah or Sam, if you guys will moderate the Q&A or how you can handle it.
No, that's good. Well, okay. One of the things that I wanted to say is, and Gary had mentioned this yesterday in our group, that you know, when we're writing grants and trying to quantify all of this stuff, we're usually left to, and I'm speaking from my perspective, we're usually left just to kind of guess a little bit about, yeah, I guess, you know, well, this sounds about right. And what I love that EcoMetrics has done is really put it into a scientific formula that gets down to the penny, and you can back it up and say, this is the system that we're using to do that. So kudos to you guys for making that scientific, if that's the right word, I guess. Gary, you had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. That is very important work, and I appreciate what y'all are doing to you know, present to us more or less how you do that calculation. So have y'all been able to sort of publish that method so that we can look that up and kind of use your method, or do we need to go to EcoMetrics and ask for that as sort of like as a paid service?
It depends on the level of detail that you want. I mean, we do, and when we put out a report, we do explain, because one of the things we're built on is transparency and the reproducibility of the information. So we do explain in some detail how we go about this. What makes EcoMetrics in terms of the defensibility and robustness is the combination of the expert input and the data that we look at and how we process the information. So there is some degree of customization that really is not self-driven. So in other words, EcoMetrics is not an app where you can go out there and punch in a couple of numbers. It does require some degree of engagement. Part of that is because we built this, one of the biggest parts of this, and this is important for the social and cultural discussion, is we have designed a lot of ecometrics around the protocols of an organization called Social Value International. So they're an international organization that really sets principles and protocols on how you identify, quantify, and value social, cultural, and all the benefits, but mainly in that category. And it's a very robust system that the only way we can maintain the credibility of SVI blessing of our work is if we do it, or if we kind of manage it. Yeah. So.
Thanks.
And that's something you can look into. For EcoMetrics, we worked with SVI to tailor their methodology for nature-based projects to tie the social impacts of those. But for the purposes of some of the people on this call, it might be worth looking into, because they do a variety of other things that just look at things like, what is the value of locating a school in a community that didn't have a school before, a grocery store where a grocery store was missing, and what values created. So there might be some, worthwhile tools available through social value that would kind of meet some of those needs. But for us, we work with them on something very specific to communicate the value generated from environmental projects.
Mark?
You're on mute.
Got it. I have a couple questions. I'll try to prioritize. I guess first question that comes to mind is, how long have these bald cypress trees been gone, and how long before they are expected to repopulate in this project? I'm thinking about this question in terms of the generational knowledge it takes to do things like make those baskets.
I think the cypress, and Jonathan or others can probably correct me because I'm not from the area, but I would say about 40 to 50 years it's been gone. You can actually, Mark, you might know the answer to this, but on the edge of the WMA, you can see some of the dead cypress that are still, and I think there's a couple alive, but just kind of the remnants of it. And then for the lifetime of our projects, we usually do 30 to 40 years. The trees we plant are 1 gallon trees. They're about 4 to 5 feet tall. And as you saw in those pictures, they're growing. So we have trees that are like 15 feet now. So, I would say in the next 15 years, we would see, and like in the photos I showed, we're already seeing some produce seeds, some birds using it for habitat, and they're not even that large yet. So we anticipate that those things will continue in the short term, but in the long term, obviously, until it gets to that mature cypress, it'd probably be, 20 to 30 years. So there is a lead time because you got to work with Mother Nature, but, we're factoring that in, and yeah, we're excited to track the progress.
Right. So I guess that's what I'm thinking is that some of that cultural knowledge will need to be somehow retained in the meantime until those trees come back.
Mm-hmm.
That's just I'm just putting that out there for everyone, not just for y'all. The other question I had was, there are times when cultural sustainability and environmental sustainability are not well aligned. And so when you ask people what they want or what they see the benefits of, that may not align with, they may actually line up with environmental costs as opposed to environmental benefits. So have you run into any examples of that?
Yeah,
You're
actually,
talking to people.
yeah, quite a bit actually, because there's competing interests and competing priorities. So what we try to do, the reason we look at all these benefits so holistically is we try to account. We don't just do a laundry list of everything in a vacuum. These are interplay. So, if we say this is a benefit to this entity, so therefore there's a positive value, but it's at the expense of this aspect, and that loses value, and therefore we have to kind of net it out. So when we do the project, it actually nets out. In terms of what if you have, how do you deal with that then in terms of prioritization? We go through this whole process of materiality assessment in terms of, this was raised as a negative by this person, but they were indifferent towards it, but it's a positive for this person that feels very, very strongly about it. So that's kind of helps with the prioritization and the balancing of it. And then we have a whole bunch of, I don't want to get into all I'd be happy to get into the discussion separately, but there's all kinds of corrections that we have to do to the data according to the SVI requirements. Are you taking credit for something that would have happened anyway? Are you taking credit for something that somebody else actually did? Do these benefits drop off after time, but you're trying to take advantage, you're trying to take credit for them for a longer period of time? All these corrections are done to these numbers. So it's a robust process.
Thanks. Good to know. Thanks.
We have a question in the chat from Bob. If another IDA comes, say next year, heaven forbid, do you expect the young cypress trees that are doing well in POINTE-AUX-CHENES WMA to survive another saltwater intrusion event?
I can't say for sure, obviously, to be honest, because every storm is different, as we know. And with this one, I'd always thought of if a storm hit, it would be the water. And for Ida, it was wind, which actually had me concerned because I hadn't thought about a wind event. And we were very happy to see that our trees had done really well. They're only growing and getting more established in the land. So as time goes on, I would say, I would expect a similar performance, but again, every storm is different. If they're sitting in salt water for 2 weeks, that's very different than, a few days and then it washes out. The part of the reason we chose POINTE-AUX-CHENES here as well is that it is within water control structures that Wildlife and Fisheries manages. And they do have the ability to close those gates. All the planting is on the interior. Obviously with big storms, there's still intrusion, but it's heavily managed and monitored. So we do have, some ability to work with that. But that's another reason we intentionally use trees that are bigger, that are 1 gallon when we plant them. Their root mass is larger so that they establish sooner in the land and that they kind of take off, because, a lot of restoration projects will just use dinky bare root seedlings. And as we know, one big Louisiana summer rainstorm could wash them out. So we strategically plant at times that kind of give them a head start, and then we plant size of trees that will get established. But we've had other plantings down at like Passalute and further south that have performed fairly well with some storms. So I feel optimistic, but I obviously can't make any promises.
Sure. There's also some more questions in the chat that I'll get into, but I just want to let people know it's hard for me to monitor the chat all the time. Maida does that. So if you're sending a direct message to me, sometimes I won't see that while we're going through this, but Sharon asked to please post contact info for social value. I'm assuming that you may want Ed's contact information. That's what I'm going to gather. So Ed,
maybe she means Social Value International.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. Thank you.
Yeah, we can send you their website, and then maybe there's a lot of people there. We'll figure out the right contact person there.
All right. And then Ed answered another question from Jessica. Do you quantify how much carbon is stored through these projects? And the answer is yes. Mart, I know you sent a message to me. I don't know if we've answered your question about that. If you want to ask
Thank you, Jonathan. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Yeah, that area where that cypress reforestation project that Restore the Earth and has been working on for some time now. That area prior to Morganza was turning into open water. Everything was dying. It was basically a high salinity content. After Morganza was built with its water control structures just south of that area, things began to change dramatically because the saltwater intrusion was being controlled in a very large, in an effective manner by the water control structures on the Morganza levee. And the difference is stark when you see the before and after pictures, and the environment that exists there now is very conducive to cypress tree growth, and that's been very evident from field visits. So things are going quite well there, and I think that while Ida in that area was more or less a major wind event, even with a more storm moving more to the west so that we get that, we're in that bad quadrant where we get a lot of surge, Morganza is going to tend to break that down. And then after the storm passes, of course, you can open the water control structures, and with the pump station that has the ability to put fresh water into that area, I think it helps enormously. And of course, with Restore the Earth, we've got a little project going at one of the pump stations that was done very inexpensively to add fresh water and sediment from Bayou Terrebonne under the right circumstances to utilize not only the existing pump stations, but the existing infrastructure there to channel that fresh water into that area. So I think this project is going very well based on what I've seen. And I can't wait to get back out there with Taylor to look at the improvements that have been made to that one particular pump station, where a lot of money from partners has been spent. So it's a great project, and it seems to me that the value of this is, while you can quantify it, I think there are benefits to the community that are difficult to quantify, but nevertheless, just real nevertheless. So good going. Nice. Thank you, Ed, Taylor.
Thank you for that, Mark. We'll end with two final questions. Gary, if you would like to ask your question, and then we'll end up with a question from Honora that's in the chat.
Okay, I think this is a nice example of how science sort of improves over time a little bit, but it makes me wonder, well, it appears that right now private foundations are using y'all's method. That's great. Is CPRA and like the Army Corps of Engineers using your method yet? And if not, it seems to me like different criteria would have been arrived at when the levee was built north of East Jean Charles, right? And if we had your system, then the levee would have been put south of Ile de Jean Charles, probably.
Where do we sign the petition?
Yeah, actually, that's an excellent question. So, Restore the Earth, we refer to, there's a nonprofit that use this, but people that have used this work are corporations, communities, other nonprofits, other LLCs that are doing different things. In terms of the government, there's a movement and has been in the government to look at natural resource and natural ecosystem valuation as part of the decision-making process. Just very recently, there was a White House paper that was issued to really try to incorporate this more into agency decision-making. But it's been a long, slow slog. And we like to think that EcoMetrics is very unique and fills a niche, but there are other ways that people try to get at this, and some are more successful than others. So who knows? Maybe they did use some degree of evaluation process, but the way they did it ended up coming up with a solution that, I mean, maybe not everybody agrees with. So, but it's getting more and more integrated into a lot of decision-making processes.
And our last question comes from Honora. And I think that this is a very important question. What are some of the factors used in valuing spiritual significance? And Ed, I think you did a great job answering that in the chat, but if you could address the whole group with that one.
Yeah, I think this is one of the, when you talk about all the degrees of sensitivity and nuance around different benefits, this is getting into probably the category of the most nuance and the most importance in terms of how you look at this. And this kind of starts to point to, there are benefits where you can't quantify and value every aspect of it because you just cannot there's just not a way to get your hands around that. So I think this definitely fits into that category where you're going to have a benefit of spiritual significance, and that's just the fact. That's just a fact. Now, part of the way you can get at some degree of quantification is to start to get a sense of how people deal with that. So it could be something purely that you can't quantify. So there's definitely a component of that, but there might be some other elements like, because of that, I want to be in that area, or because of that, I feel better about myself, and that translates into better physical health, better mental health, which can be quantified. There are many studies have done that quantify and put a value on improved mental health and physical health. So there are elements that can be quantified, but there are other parts that cannot, especially in this category. Spiritual, historical, cultural, these categories as such that always have a qualitative component to it that you accept at face value, I guess is the way to put it. So. I don't want to make that sound like a cop-out, but I also don't want to make it sound like everything can get a dollar value to the penny, and it's unrealistic to think that way.
Yeah. Taylor, did you have something that you wanted to add to that? Or okay.
No, I think Ed did a great job. So we make a good team.
I think so too. All right, so let me share my screen, and hopefully it is going to share correctly, and apparently it is not. So let me try this again. In the meantime, while I am trying to get this going, let's see how that looks. Exit to, maybe we're getting somewhere. Here we go. What is your hope for the coast? And I ask Taylor if you will answer this, and then Ed, what is your hope for the coast? And I'll try to get this into slideshow mode.
My hope is that we can continue to work with like South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center, a lot of the groups on the call and others, to be able to continue to demonstrate and better demonstrate the value of restoring and preserving lands on the coast and the culture on the coast, and demonstrate the value of sustaining coastal cultural livelihoods and identity. There's a lot to be lost, but as we know, there's a lot to be gained. And when we can find projects like the POINTE-AUX-CHENES project, and Mart, thank you for stepping in and explaining why it's, uniquely positioned, to be able to find a project that can sustain 4,000 acres of cypress and provide some meaningful protection, but also some meaningful additional value to the coastal communities. We want to continue to find those opportunities and make them possible, and demonstrate the value of why they're important to preserve these communities and these ecosystems.
Thank you for that. Ed?
The only thing I want to add, Taylor put that beautifully. The only thing I would add is that to people, that one of my hopes for the coast is that people understand the connections between these benefits, so that it's not just a matter of saying, I know all these 50 things are important, but they feed each other, and you're realizing multiple benefits because of these attributes. And I think that's going to unleash an incredible amount of support and investment and action, that'll really move things forward. One thing I learned as I got more involved, because I'm not from Louisiana, one thing I learned as I got involved in these projects is the incredible impact that area has on the world. When you think about the ecosystems and biodiversity and culture and the economy, energy sector, the food sector, it's incredible. The value that's packed into that area.
Thank you for that, Bob. Next up, and Maida, I'm not sure if Theo is with us or if you would like to.
Theo asked me to report for him.
Okay.
I just want to remind everybody that we are preparing a response to the Coastal Master Plan. Theo is leading that, and they're probably going to have a first draft in about a week. And then we want to submit it as early as possible, because it's more likely to actually influence the final draft. But anyway, so I'm real pleased with what Theo and the Culture and Coastal Planning Working Group is doing.
Excellent. And then for the position statement?
Simone, are you here?
I am. Yeah, so far we have 88 individuals sign on in 19 organizations. So that's great, but we want to, keep that list growing. You probably have received an email notifying you to sign on. And you can, Maida just put a link in the chat. If you're new, you can go on right now, sign on for yourself as an individual, or if you're authorized to do so, you can sign on for your organization. And if you have any ideas about the position statement or questions, please feel free to contact me, and Maida put my email in the chat as well. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, and here's some more information about the upcoming working groups. We've got the French language immersion group. Something exciting about this group is they're planning a summit that's gonna be coming up. More information will be shared with you all about that. And then the Culture and Coastal Planning Working Group meets Thursday, March 9th at 1, meets twice a month. Our next gathering is actually going to be, I'm sorry, forgive me for that, I'm jumping ahead. This is about a upcoming working group meeting that's gonna be co-convened by Haley and Tracy. That's gonna be Thursdays at 9 monthly. The next meeting is Thursday, March 23rd. If you're interested in preparing receiving communities, please join that group. This is how you get in touch with folks. If you are interested in participating in any of those working groups, if you want to find out more about them, we're also looking for a convener for the Artist Tradition Bearers and Coastal Issues group. So if you're interested in that, please let us know. This is what I jumped the gun on. This is our next Bayou Culture Gathering will be in person. It will be at the Louisiana Folklore Society annual meeting, which is going to be in New Orleans. And there, our very own Maida Owens will be presenting her workshop on climate migration and welcoming newcomers. So we hope that you will join us in person for that. Louisiana Folklore Society annual meeting is in New Orleans. Here's all the information for that. And more information can be found on their website. If you would like to submit a proposal to present at the meeting, those proposals are due by March 1st. Any announcements from the group? Anybody have anything that they would like to share in this for this part. Otherwise, we're gonna begin wrapping this up. So here are some ways to connect with us. There's, you follow us on Facebook. We also have a few things listed on our YouTube channel. All of these gatherings are posted there. And so if you ever miss any of these, you can find past gatherings there. All right, so again, Taylor, Ed, thank you both for being with us. This concludes the formal part of our gathering.